Hey, this is Matt here at ECS Tuning, talking to you today about some tips for fitting your exhaust system. First things first, I normally start off with trying to fit sections of the exhaust system that have more direct, straight outlets to them. So a good example of this is this front section here. So if you start with straight sections and then add the bend sections after that, it's easier to kind of get an idea of which direction they need to point before you're just wondering why this pipe is over here or up in the differential. Do it one piece at a time. Don't throw the entire system on at once, because it's going to be a lot harder to identify fitment issues if you're just rotating pipes and it's changing the whole system at once. If you're doing it one pipe at a time, it's a lot easier to figure out, like, oh, I turned this pipe and now it points this way instead of this way, and that'll give you an idea of why things are hitting each other. Just take your time. Issues that you can be having and the reason you're getting frustrated is because you have the whole system on and small changes you're making are making big changes down the line. So if you start getting frustrated, like your tips aren't lining up or something like that, if you remove the tips and try to take a look at, like, well, now that those are off, I can see that this pipe is exiting this way, and if I rotate this pipe, it actually exits straight now. It'll give you a better idea other than just rotating that and now the tips are pointed off in some unknown direction. Another good thing to look for when you're installing these exhausts is when you're putting your hangers in. If you're having problems and you notice that your hanger standoff that goes through your rubber hanger is at an angle, it's probably not supposed to be that way. You're better off, whenever you put these in, trying to get these oriented so that the hanger on the exhaust system and the hanger on the car are parallel to each other. Another thing is if you're having issues getting the exhaust tight enough, like if you feel like you're tightening down your clamps, but it still rotates, or if you pull on it, you still feel like it can shift a little bit, a good tip is be careful how far onto the pipe you have these clamps. I normally try to get them completely flush with the end of the pipe, or even just hang them off a little bit, the end, because all these pipes are is just a normal pipe with slots cut in it so it can flex when you clamp it down. So if you have it too far onto the pipe and you're off the slits in the pipe, it won't clamp down all the way, and you'll have to tighten this way more than you normally would to get it to actually lock down and be tight. So try to have it either flush with the end of the pipe or flush with the end of the slit in the pipe. That way you're getting all the clamping force on the part of the pipe that's actually going to flex. Another thing to take into account with pertaining to the clamps is that when you're assembling this thing, one, don't forget to put your clamps on before you start putting pipes on, because that's really annoying. If you get the whole exhaust system on, then you're like, oh shit, none of the clamps are there, they're still in the bag. So make sure you get your clamps on. Another thing to really think about is where your clamps are gonna sit. Now, I know a lot of people like to tuck these things up on top of the pipe so they're not as visible. Me personally, I like ease of access and ease of use, so I try to point them down so I can get to them, because it's all under the car so you don't really see it. It doesn't matter. But for instance, this clamp, if I put this on the other way, it would be up against this pipe. So it's important to think about where this bulky part of your clamp is going to be once it's on the car. If you're planning on putting it on top, you need to think about how close that's going to be to the floor. Or if you want to put it in this orientation so it's easy to tighten down, you need to think about its proximity to either the tunnel or the chassis of the car or the pipe next to it. So good thing to think about when you're putting these clamps on the exhaust system. And then as far as your tip placement goes and fitting your tips, I would really suggest to try to get as much of the rest of the exhaust system fit up and straight where it's looking nice as possible before you start messing with the tips, because this by far can be the most frustrating thing. There's nothing worse than looking at the back of your car and realizing that these tips are 2 inches lower than those tips. So I would try to get the rest of the exhaust system fit up real nice and level first, and then working on getting your tips on, getting them straight and level. The AWE is actually really nice for this reason, because they made the tip section separate from this rear pipe, so you can actually rotate this up and down and move it in and out to help with your tip placement. So that's a big benefit of this AWE exhaust system. And finally, I'll address the situation of the fact that I'm standing underneath the car. If you're doing this on your back, it's gonna suck. I don't really have a good way to tell you to do it that isn't gonna suck. We're fortunate enough here to work with lifts. So the only thing I can tell you is there are some pros and cons to working on your back, One, it's a little bit easier to do this alone because you can kind of set stuff on your chest and you don't need to worry about holding stuff above your head as much or having a friend hold it or using like pull jacks. You can just use a floor jack, which is kind of nice. Another tip is just make sure when you go to do it that you don't have somewhere to be in a couple hours. Give yourself time so you can go slow and get everything right. Because if you're rushing and you're on your back, it's gonna be the most frustrating experience you've ever tried to do. So give yourself a lot of time to do this so you can make sure everything's right and everything's lined up, and just do it one piece at a time, which is the same if you're using a lift. You're just better off doing one piece at a time and getting it all straight in sections instead of all at once, just because it's a lot easier to identify problems. But it's gonna be even more important if you're doing it on your back, because it's gonna be a lot harder to fix mistakes later if you're having to crawl under the car.